Hello, and welcome to Tell Me About Your Book. My name is John Christian. In this episode, I will be speaking with self-published author Caitlin Avery. She is a delightful, outspoken feminist who has written 3 books. Today, Caitlin will be talking mainly about her third and most recent book, a fictional account of her own personal journey. Sounds interesting? Well, stay tuned. Hi, Caitlin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's very nice to be here.
I understand that we'll be talking about the third book you've written, the most recent one. Tell me all about that one.
Yes, my latest book released on December 27th, and it is called Life of Cyn, but Cyn stands for Cynthia. So it is a C-Y-N. Cynthia has just learned at the beginning of the story that her husband's new boss is the guy who assaulted her in high school. And she decides 20 years after the fact to go after the guy, but she has to keep it a secret from her husband.
Well, I can't say I would blame a woman for doing that. And I guess it would have been a big surprise for her when she found out her husband got a new job with a new boss. Is that the idea?
Well, so it's not a surprise that he got a new job, but they had just moved across the country. He interviewed, without her even in the area, and then moved ahead of time. And so he started this job and she has just arrived in town. And it just so happens that the company is having a 20th anniversary party and she's invited to attend. So it's kind of a whirlwind situation. Their life has been kind of upside down, topsy-turvy. And she then gets slammed with this piece of information. And she doesn't want to get her husband involved yet because they really need this job and she doesn't want to stress him out. She decides to sort of keep it to herself for the time being, but she wants to go after the guy.
Sort of a retribution story by the sounds of it.
Absolutely. It's designed basically to give Me Too movement survivors, people who are sex assault survivors, sort of something to look forward to in terms of, so often you hear about these stories not leading to any sort of justice whatsoever. And this one, basically, she receives plenty of justice by the end of the story.
Okay. Well, I'm all for that. Definitely all for that. You kind of answered the next question I was going to ask as to what caused you to write this particular kind of story. Do you mind, not elaborating on your own personal experiences, but the passion behind it? And obviously you thought about this before you thought about writing a story like this. What was it like for you to write this?
This book I've been working on it for 5 years, and I really can't tell the story of how I came to write it without discussing my personal story. So I always like to, put it out there first that there is a trigger warning about sex assault and alcoholism in this story and my own story. So basically in 2015, which was about a year and a half before the Me Too movement actually took off on Twitter, I outed my rapist on Facebook. I did it knowing about a couple of other victims already, but within 24 hours of me sharing his name and my experience with him online, I learned of a total of 10 victims very quickly, all from my high school. So this is a high school situation. I was 17 when the assault happened. And essentially, there was a lot of excitement to try to go after him at that time from not just the survivors, the people who were affected by it, but other people who were hearing this story. There was all sorts of talk about, forming a protest outside of his place of work or his house. I was contacted by the local news station, and another survivor wrote a blog about her experience with him. So it blew up pretty quickly. But because it was before Me Too happened, and I was like the first person I knew to ever do this, I started to get pretty nervous about what kind of maybe legal stuff he might come after me, for slander. Or I was actually kind of nervous about violence. He might come after me in terms of violence because he lives in the neighboring town. to me. So I basically backed off pretty quickly. I decided not to pursue anything outside of just simply outing him and shaming him on Facebook. So the bottom line is, all these years later, the Me Too movement picked up, and all these people, women were basically doing this on a sort of regular basis for a while. And nothing really ever happened to my assailant. He was shamed and embarrassed for a short period of time, but then it kind of got swept under the rug again, which over time I decided was unacceptable. And so the reason I wrote the story was twofold. I wanted to write a better story. It's not my story. It's a new plot, a completely new plot. But I basically decided to take what I wish we could have done and have this woman do it. Like the payoff. I needed the payoff in some form, so I invented it.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be a really a story that Me Too women can get behind and get excited about, essentially. But the story goes beyond her getting even with him. It's a story about forgiveness and how the power of forgiveness can really help with healing. So that is essentially why I wrote the story, and it's brought it back into the light again. So as of late, I've been talking about this online so much that I'm bringing up his name again. He's once again being shamed, which I think is an appropriate punishment, since he'll never be punished in any other way. But I think it's been really effective, and people have gotten really behind me on this, and really supporting both the book and my mission.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what you're doing and how you're doing it is wonderful. It's a shame that, of course, we don't have justice in these cases.
Mm-hmm.
I've known several women in my life, some intimately and others just, as friends. This is a common thing. This happens a lot. I've heard so many stories like this.
Yeah.
And they don't write books. They don't even shame the people. They just say, okay, well, that's just happened. And I can't imagine that just happening in my life. I'm a bit of a pistol when I come when it comes to justice,
Yeah.
And
Well, it's taken me a long time to get to this point. I was 17. I'm 50 now. Okay, so I have gone through all kinds of healing, from therapy to I had to get sober. I basically used, alcohol over the course of many years. I started using alcohol as self-medication, which so many people do. So that was something I had to address. And that is a big theme in the story Life of Cyn, because in the beginning, she's abusing alcohol as well, and she has to quit. And the big message in the story is that just because someone hurt you, you can't turn around and ruin other people's lives. All kinds of people have terrible traumas and difficulties that they've had to face, but there are two ways to handle it. You can work on yourself and figure out healthy ways to deal with your trauma so you can be a productive human in society and not injure others. Or you can go about, lashing out at people. And so the story features all different examples of people who have gone through difficulties, maybe in childhood or in adulthood. And some of them turned their lives around, and became a good person, and some of them didn't. And oftentimes I think people who are abusing others have been abused, but that's not an excuse.
No, it never is.
Yeah.
This is the third book you've written, and we don't necessarily have to talk about the first two, but you have written two other books.
Yes.
And like anything else, the more you do something, the better you get at it. And, your other two books, they didn't cover a subject like this at all?
Well, they absolutely did. The first one absolutely did.
Okay.
So the very first time I publicly discussed my assault and sort of, how my life went after that is in my memoir. That was the very first book I wrote. I wrote it in 2002, so 21 years ago. I published it myself in 2010, and that was the very first example of me sharing my story. I did not share his name. I did not expose him at that time, but that was sort of like part of the evolutionary process for me. It was the beginning of me getting very comfortable discussing this. And I will say I am 100% not emotionally moved by it anymore. It's like talking about my grocery list when I discuss these intimate things, because I've just had so much practice. And I feel like turning, lemons into lemonade is what I'm doing by helping others. So it doesn't bother me to discuss any of these sort of details anymore.
Right.
Yeah. But the memoir was like my first exposure to that. And I had a very difficult time marketing it. Like I really didn't market it one iota, because I was nervous about people reading about my life, essentially.
Exactly. And, writing a memoir when you're not necessarily a famous person, unless you are famous,
Nope.
may not be of interest to a lot of people,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think what you've done here by writing it in a fictional form and then filling in all the details that you would like to see happen in a situation like that can be actually much more effective. Have you
Yeah,
found that?
well, it was a very different theme. The memoir was actually my search for love and enlightenment in Los
Right.
Angeles. But bottom line is, it was learning how to love myself. I had a lot of self-hatred and, abusing myself in numerous ways. And it was basically sort of a year where I figured out what I needed to do to become better and become a
Mm,
healthier person.
mm.
So that was the memoir. It wasn't entirely addressing the assault. That was just one sort of little tidbit explaining how I was, like how I'd gotten to where I was at
Sure.
that point. But yeah, no, it's definitely, this has been a lot easier to market, partially because I have so much practice now discussing the
Yeah,
themes, really.
yeah, that too. As a writer, though, where did it come from that you, besides the need to write a memoir for your own personal reasons, not everybody sits around and writes a memoir, even though everyone has a life. And as you pointed out, some hardships people have, and they don't write books about it. Um, what made you write?
Well, writing has always been a huge part of my life. I was a big like diary kid, journaling. I wrote poetry starting at the age of 10, and I actually set out to write my first book at the age of 6. I scrawled it in a little composition book that I got from school. It was called The Ladybug and the Penny, and I did not have the endurance to finish it at that age. So it's literally been an outlet for me. I used to like have trouble sleeping when I was a kid, and I would get up and write underneath the covers. Like I wasn't supposed to be awake, and I would write stuff under the covers. So the bottom line is, it's always been an outlet. And the reason I started writing the memoir when I did is because I had just come out of another dumpster fire relationship. It was a mess. It was filled with drama. I'd had several like that. And I realized finally that the common denominator was moi. And that was the only thing I could work on. I couldn't fix these guys. They were kind of messed up too, but that was their business. So I took a look at what I needed to do to become a Mrs. Right, so to speak, if I were ever going to find Mr. Right. And the cool thing is that a few months after I finished the first draft, I had been single for, I don't know, like 8 months or something. And I started dating a little bit during the writing of this book. And I ended up meeting the man who would become my husband. I met him, and I think we got married 3 years later, but we're together today. We're celebrating our 18th year together now, or 18th marriage year. So the book worked for me. I think sometimes it might work for others too, to sort of take a look at their own selves and figure out what they need to do. But all the things that I practiced during that time and wrote about, it definitely led me to a much better place. So
Excellent. Excellent. I'm a musician. You can probably tell from some of the stuff behind me. I've been a musician ever since I've been 8, I guess. I started playing guitar at 10. It's a passion of mine that's never gone away. And then writing took over about 5 or 6 years ago. So I've been talking to a lot of authors like yourself. And there's something, I asked the questions to some people, and I asked you this: why writing? Because it's a passion, right? It's just
yeah.
something that's in you. Even when you weren't able to do it, you just work
Yeah.
towards it. Yeah.
I wanted to get the thoughts out of my head. I guess it
Yeah.
feels like it quiets them down in my head.
Hmm.
I'm an overthinker, who so many people are. But it's getting it out on paper. In some cases, like there's rituals that can be done. You get it out on paper, you burn it up. I mean, there are ways to really try to get rid of those thoughts. And it's just been an intuition of mine since I was really young.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about your second book just briefly?
I would love to. I'll keep it brief. Yes,
Okay.
I wrote a book called The Last Cruise. Now, cruise is spelled with a Z. It is Spanish for the word cross. The Last Cruise is about 3 young women on a vacation in Mexico gone totally wrong. They're motorcycling down Baja, and they run into all kinds of trouble. after they cross paths with a drug lord, basically.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds like television.
I wish. I wrote the screenplay and it has been shopped by two different people in Hollywood and where they tried to make it into a movie.
A movie,
It
yeah.
may happen at some point, but yeah, it's definitely a much more visual story than the others that I've written.
I want to see this. Yeah.
It's an adventure thriller, so it's a high octane
Cool.
motorcycle story about women. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you call yourself a feminist?
Absolutely. I was raised by a serious feminist, and I think that was the only way I could have turned out.
Great. Excellent. Any final words that you may want to add to this? Like, for instance, where can your books be purchased and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. All of my books are available on Amazon and in Kindle Unlimited, so you can read it for free on the Kindle Lending Library. My most recent book, Life of Cyn, is available everywhere. It is in KU, Kindle Unlimited, so that means that's the only place that you can read the ebook on, Amazon. But in terms of the paperback, it's available at you can go to any bookstore and have them order it from their distributor. Library can also order it from their distributor, Barnes and Noble. So yeah, it's available everywhere.
Okay. How are the sales for your new book? And perhaps even I could ask about your second book. What are sales like for you?
So my latest book has taken off like I never could have imagined. I had several viral videos about my story happen right before I launched, like within the week before I launched, and it really stirred up quite a lot of interest. So this book has blown any of my other books out of the water. I'm on day 14, and I have sold more books in the first 14 days than I did in the first year with my last book. It made it to #1 new release in dramas on Amazon on day 3.
Great.
Oh, well.
I just thought of another question.
Yeah.
The other women that were involved and came forward about this rapist, do they know that you wrote this book?
Most definitely they do. Some of them, actually, I would say the majority of them didn't have interest in discussing it publicly or discussing it really any further with me. They came forward to tell me just enough to let me know that they were also a victim. In a couple of cases, it was friends of somebody who said it happened to my friend with that person. But there was one person who was also a victim who was very public. She did do an interview about it. She wrote and published a blog about it. So she has been helping me to promote it. But tons of people from my high school are very enthusiastic about what I'm doing for obvious reasons. And so these people have been sharing it amongst their social media groups and stuff. So yeah, it's
good.
Been getting a lot of talk. So
that's great.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure hearing your story and your book and seeing how well you've adjusted after all this trauma.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate
Caitlin, it's really nice been talking to you, and I wish you well.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's our show for today. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, I would really love to talk with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.